everything is going wrong for the 49ers this season. They fall 38-10 to the Green Bay Packers. You had a lot of guys who are out. Brock Purdy didn't play. Trent Williams didn't play. Nick Bosa didn't play. But even though those guys didn't play, you still had Deebo Samuel who played, George Kittle, Chris McCaffrey, and that still wasn't enough. They just got worked in this game. And this loss falls on Kyle Shanahan, just like the rest of the other 49er losses this year fall on Kyle Shanahan. Because when you are considered to be an elite head coach, injuries are not an excuse for you losing. Even Sean McVay was able to win a few games and still a couple when he had all those injuries, when he didn't have Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Elite coaches find ways to win with less. And Kyle Shanahan hasn't really been able to do that this year. And not only has Kyle Shanahan not been able to make up for the injuries that the 49ers have had to deal with, but his play calling hasn't been that good. His game management as a whole has been bad compared to how good he's been at managing games in the past. You know, when the 49ers fall, it's hard for them to come back from behind in games because Kyle Shanahan isn't a coach that really loves to win games by just spamming passing plays. He's a head coach that wants to run the football. So therefore, when he gets trailing, you make him uncomfortable. He's not comfortable playing from behind. And with getting Chris McCaffrey back, you would think that that would have sparked the offense because this offense, the numbers are down in terms of production this season from what they have been the past 2 years. And I just believe that the 49ers, they're in for one of those years where they got to reset because you've already missed your Super Bowl window the past couple of years when you lost to Mahomes in 2019 and you lost to him once again last year in the Super Bowl. And it's hard to continue to have that same level of success year in and year out, maintaining the same players on your roster. Some of these guys, the 49ers, are going to have to let go in the offseason. You might have to trade away George Kittle. You definitely got to trade away Deebo Samuel. Hell, I felt they should have traded away Deebo Samuel years ago, right after he had that all-pro season. Deebo Samuel has always been one of the most overrated players in the NFL in my eyes. After he had that 1,400-yard year and he got that massive contract extension, I immediately told everybody that was a bad decision because Deebo Samuel is not a wide receiver. He's a great athlete in terms of you can move him around, play him at running back, play him anywhere on the offense as a chess piece, but he's not a good wide receiver in general. He's one of those guys that you just have to scheme ways to get the football. You got to get him in space. And that limits your play calling if you're Kyle Shanahan because the only way you can get Deebo the ball is by putting him at running back, calling screens, reverses. You pretty much are overpaying for a guy who is no more than a bona fide gadget player. He struggles to create separation. He isn't really that fast neither. Deebo Samuel just is not that good of a wide receiver. I'm not saying that the dude sucks because he does have a special skill set that makes him unique, but you have to craft your offense around him. He's not one of those players that you just plug and play at receiver and then he just immediately produces. No, you have to scheme your offense around his strengths. And his strengths really don't equate that much to the 49ers being able to win with them not having Brandon Ayuk because Brandon Ayuk, the difference between him and Deebo Samuel is that he's the more polished receiver of the two. He can actually get open and beat man-to-man press coverage. He can actually create separation downfield. Deebo Samuel struggles to do that. And you spent the first-round pick on Ricky Pearsall, and the dude got 0 targets in this game. What's up with that? The 49ers just aren't doing a good job of putting their best players in position to succeed. Because we've seen games this year when Deebo Samuel has gone on for over 100 receiving yards. What was Kyle Shanahan doing in those games to have Deebo Samuel playing well that he's not doing now, where it looks like Deebo Samuel looks like he deserves to be benched with how he's played? He's getting into it with the long snapper on the sideline. Like, what does Deebo Samuel do well anymore? It's the question that I'm asking. Because Chris McCaffrey, he might have rushed back from that injury. And I was hesitant to draft Christian McCaffrey on a lot of my fantasy leagues just off the premise. And I know a lot of y'all don't care too much for superstitions, but I really do believe the Madden curse is real. And the Madden curse definitely has affected Christian McCaffrey with him missing the majority of this year due to that injury that he had to go across the pond to get looked at, and then he comes back and he doesn't look as explosive. You don't see the quick cutting, you don't see the agility in him anymore. When you watch Christian McCaffrey play this year versus him last season, it's a night and day difference. Now, maybe as the season goes along, we'll see Christian McCaffrey continue to get back into form, but the running back position has the shortest lifespan of any other position in the NFL. And I wouldn't be surprised if we've seen the prime days of Christian McCaffrey behind us. And the 49ers, you've been in the Super Bowl discussion for the last 4 to 5 years. Eventually, you're going to have some years where you have to reset. You might have to trade away some veterans, get younger. My big issue with the 49ers is that you still continue to ignore the offensive line. Look, I get it. Kyle Shanahan is a really good schemer. You can plug any running back, any offensive lineman into his system, and he produces at a high level. But I feel like Kyle Shanahan is cutting himself short. Because why would you accept average to above average offensive linemen when you can go ahead, draft better offensive linemen that have high potential in the draft, that also fit your scheme? You have a great offensive line and you couple that with a great scheme, you will be unstoppable. I just don't get why the 49ers are okay with bare minimum at certain positions. Just because you're a good coach and you can make up from not being as talented at certain positions as what other coaches need to be to succeed still doesn't mean that you should tolerate the bare minimum. If you can do better is the old saying. And the 49ers offensive line is not that good as what it needs to be if they plan on turning their season around and making a deep playoff run, because they're 5-6 right now. And they have some really tough games coming up down the stretch where you play the Bills, the Rams, the Dolphins, the Lions, the Cardinals. And I don't really see a world where the 49ers can win any of those games, especially if you're going to be missing Brock Purdy. We don't know when he's going to come back. And another question is, are you going to pay Brock Purdy this offseason? Because you already have all of these aging veterans. So you're going to be strapped for cash as it already is. Then you're going to have to pay for a quarterback who you may not have to pay right now. Right now, the 49ers' biggest priority should be getting younger. Don't focus on paying Brock Purdy, because I don't really think the market for Brock Purdy is going to be that good. And I don't really think that Brock Purdy necessarily is going to be in a hurry to get a contract extension done. If you are Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, you don't necessarily have to rebuild, just blow it all up and start over, but you do somewhat need to reset at certain positions. You can get rid of Nick Bosa, maybe trade him for 2 first-rounders, see if you can draft the best edge rusher in this year's draft class coming up, and then maybe sign somebody in free agency that can give you a little bit of production at that position. Obviously, it's hard to find another Nick Bosa. We know when he's fully healthy, he's arguably the best edge rusher in the NFL. But at this point, with him being unable to stay on the field and him getting older, it makes more sense to move on from him before you just can get no value in return for him at all. And if you can get some younger players, it can help out Kyle Shanahan, because you have players now that had the potential to be not only good scheme fits for you, but they also could be better than what you had before. What if you're able to use one of those 2 first-round picks that you could get in a hypothetical trade for Nick Bosa on the offensive tackle, or 2 offensive tackles in this draft class coming up? Because Trent Williams is eventually going to hang it up. What is your backup plan for when Trent Williams retires? Because it's hard to find elite left tackles. That's why Trent Williams, despite how old he is still getting paid so much money, because teams rather play a guy like Trent Williams all that money despite being old, because you know that you can still get really high level play out of him versus trying to gamble on a younger player. The 49ers their season to me is falling apart. I really don't see them making it to the playoffs, but I'm still not counting them out. But it looks like their run is over for the time being. Not saying that they never will get back to another Super Bowl under Kyle Shanahan. I don't believe that firing Kyle Shanahan needs to happen. What I believe is that him and John Lynch after this season, they need to sit down. They need to say, okay, bro, like, if we're going to get back to the Super Bowl, we got to address these positions. We got to get younger here. We got to get younger here. And we got to move on from guys that we gave bad contracts to. They already tried to trade Deebo Samuel a few off seasons ago, and they still kept him. Well, now it's time to cut bait with Deebo Samuel. Either you trade him in the offseason or you just eat the dead cat, because there's no use holding on to a guy that kind of hinders your offense. Christian McCaffrey, you need to spell him more. He doesn't need to be your workhorse back anymore. It would make a lot more sense if you gave Christian McCaffrey 15, 18 touches a game, because he's not one of those players that you can just give a heavy workload to, because eventually he is going to get injured. Therefore, you got to be very strategic with when you give Christian McCaffrey touches, which is why it would make more sense to give Jordan Mason more touches. And if you don't like Jordan Mason because he struggles in pass pro or he's not a good receiving back, well, go draft one in the next year's draft. You know, there's plenty of good running backs to pick from, and Kyle Shanahan has an eye for running backs. Shouldn't be that hard. But right now, the 49ers, they're not in a good place. And things are only getting worse with the injuries that they have piling up and the difficulty of their schedule ramping up. I think this season is all but over for San Fran.